first scenario is an income tax question whereby, and I think Atia, you had said that you'd been given a question like this in a test or an exam or something, where you were told something about like the medical aid value and not necessarily that they contribute to medical aid. So here there's a situation of medical aid of 3,200 Rand per month. And then the second example we're going to have a look at is where I tell you that this person, whoever they are on a medical aid, they're the main member and they have dependents. So we're going to have a look at those two scenarios to see how they differ, how they work. I will say this though, having gone through a fair amount of past papers over the last few days, I haven't actually seen one yet that actually deals with medical aid. The only time I've seen medical aid mentioned is if they then specifically say this person does not contribute towards medical aid. So I've yet to actually see, excuse me, it's been a week. I've yet to actually see an example where they've asked you to consider medical aid. But obviously we know that medical aid exists and we know it has an effect on income tax. So we do need to be able to deal with it. Like I said, I have yet to see it asked, which either means that they won't ask it or it means that the time is coming where they are going to ask it. And unfortunately, I can't tell you which one it is. So rather be prepared. All right, so I'm just trying to grab my calculator. Oy vey. All right, okay, there we go. Right. Okay. So this first one says, Mila is 65 years old and works for himself. He pays himself a monthly salary of 23,000 Rand and he gives himself a 13th check in December. So this little statement here about the 13th check, that's quite important because what it's telling us is that his income is over 13 payments of 23,000 Rand and not 12. And that's going to be important just now when we have to work out the annual gross income. We're then also told that he has the following deductions: medical aid of 3,200 Rand per month and pension of 10% of his gross salary rather. Now, a couple things to remember when we talk about income tax. Both of these two things are non-taxable. I don't know if that's a word, but we basically don't pay tax on them. Pension is up to a maximum of 27.5% that we don't pay tax. I did say this last week, but just as a reminder, so it's up to a maximum of 27.5% that we don't have to pay tax. Anything more than that, we do pay tax on. So his 10% is fine. That whole 10% value can just be deducted before we get to tax. And in this case, the medical aid, even though they haven't said anything about him being a member of a medical aid and medical aid credits or anything like that, medical aid is also one of the deductions that we take off before we calculate tax. So that's just something to remember when we get into our income tax calculations. All right, so the first question asks us to prove that his annual taxable salary is 230,700 Rand. Okay, so I suppose we can just go all the way. Remember, taxable salary in this specific scenario is going to be our gross salary. So it's a very aggressive pen, but anyway, minus the medical aid, minus the pension. That's not how you spell pension, sorry. Now, importantly, it's annual taxable salary. Remember, we spoke about last week the fact that all of your tax calculations are dealt or deal with annual values. So these tax tables here, or annual amounts. So ideally, we want to be working with an annual value for all of these. Right now, you can obviously do this all in one go if you feel comfortable. I'm going to do it step by step. So we need to get our annual gross income. And that will be the 23,000 Rand that he earns every single month, so for 12 months. But remember, he also gets a 13th check, so we will times that by 13. Sometimes we throw a 13th check situation in there for you. And just remember, it forms part of the income, so it needs to be calculated as part of the gross income. So that's just under 300,000 Rand annual gross. The medical aid, remember, was 3,200 Rand per month. So we're going to have to take the 3,200 and times that by 12. That's not 13. It's just 12 months for the medical aid, which gives us 38,400. And then we had the pension, that was 10% of the gross. So 10% of our 299,000 Rand, which is 29,900. Oh, that's too many nines. 900 Rand. Okay, so using our little formula that we wrote down, we are now going to take our gross amount and we are going to subtract the medical aid and the pension. Right, so we've got the values quite literally just substituted in and subtract. So 299,900 minus our medical aid, the 38,400, minus the pension, 29,900, and you would get an annual taxable income. And remember, this is the amount that we now use in our income tax tables of 230,700 Rand. Now remember, the question said prove that or show that his annual taxable salary is this amount. We've managed to do that, so that's all good. If you don't manage to do that, grade 12s, in the next questions that follow on, just use the amount they were given, or that they gave you rather. So if you weren't able to prove that this salary was correct, so if you did not get the 23,700, that's not the end of the world. Just use the amount that they gave you. If you don't, it's also not the end of the world. We will CA or continue accuracy mark your next answers, but just for ease of your markers, like ease of marking, just use the value that they gave you. However, if you panic, just use your answer that you got, do all of your working out as you need to do it. You will get full marks if you've used the wrong answer. So you'll lose marks here in question A, but in question C, where it says calculate the annual tax or whatever it says, you will get full marks as long as you apply everything correctly to your amount. So don't panic if you don't get the same value. It's not the end of the world. It will all sort of even out later. We won't take off marks again once you've lost marks when you've done something wrong. All right, question B says, what is his rebate if he is 65 years old? So remember we spoke about last week, Saturday, how rebates work. So rebates are cumulative, which means that the older you get, the more rebate you get. So this person is 65. So that means he falls into or gets up to the secondary rebate because he is 65 and older, but he's 65. So he gets both of these rebates, the primary and the secondary rebate of 14,220 for the primary and 7,794 for the secondary. All you do is just add them together, and all you need to remember here is that he gets both. So 14,220 plus 7,794. Total rebate amount will be 22,014 Rand. Now that's going to be important in our next question when we ask to then calculate the tax. Right, and just to help us out here, I'm just going to move this over here so we've got all of our values that we need. Right, so the last question says calculate his annual taxable income after tax. Now I had that little flow diagram for you guys last week. Let's just grab our flow diagram. And I'm going to ask you to try this one by yourself. So I'm going to put the flow diagram here. We've actually already done some of these calculations. So what we have already done is we have already worked out the gross annual income. We've subtracted the pension and the medical aid, and now we have the annual taxable income. We are now at this step over here, and we now need to use the tax tables to determine the income tax. So I'm going to make this a touch smaller just so that you can see the tax table. And you can still see the flow diagram. So I'm going to give you guys like 5 minutes. I want you to try, right? So try and give me what his annual taxable income will be after his rebates. So try that calculation for me. If you've got questions as you go along, you can obviously ask. but give it a try and we'll look in about 5 minutes at what your answers are. Remember, guys, if you get stuck, just ask. As long as you are good, then that's fine. I'll take the silence as a good sign. And then give you 3 more minutes. Alrighty, guys, let's have a look. Okay, so I've actually already done a fair amount of work. I don't know if you remember, again, last week, Saturday, I spoke about the fact that sometimes we're quite nice and we guide you a little bit with these questions. The one we did last week was not so nice because I didn't guide you. I just sort of was like, do it. And it was worth, I think it was like, what was it, like 6 marks, 8 marks, something like that. So we expected you to kind of do the working out in the previous 2 questions all at the same time, which they can ask you to do and we can expect that of you. But if you follow the steps in the flow diagram, you will be absolutely fine. So the first thing we need to decide is the tax bracket. And remember, we're using this amount over here to determine the tax bracket. So can tell me, your English, can someone tell me which bracket we're in? So 1, 2, 3, etc. Which bracket do we need to use here?
Ma'am, the second bracket.
Lovely. Okay, good. So we need to use the second tax bracket with the 35,253, 26%, blah, blah, blah. Now, remember I said to you again last week that this thing over here, this taxable income above, don't panic about that. All you do is you take your annual taxable income you've calculated and you subtract the amount in the table. But you'll see that in a second. Okay, so our income tax or annual tax, whatever you want to say, is going to be 35,253 Rand plus 26% of the amount over 195,850. So we take out 230,700, the annual taxable income, and we subtract that amount that we were given. And we basically just put all of that into our calculator. Now, again, if you would like to work out everything individually, so if you'd first like to go and subtract those answers and then work out the 26%, that's obviously absolutely fine. You do what you're comfortable with, but you can actually just type this all into your calculator. There's no need to do it step by step. Obviously, if you wanted to, that's cool. So if you did want to, my pen looks a bit sad here. This 26% of the difference is 9,061. And we will get our answer there, which 40 something. $44,341. No, not 41, sorry, 14. And what do we do now? What's our next step?
Ma'am, you minus the rebates.
Okay, good. We minus the rebates. So we're going to take off the 22,014 Rand. And we end up with 22,300. So that's the annual tax that he has to pay. Not a lot at all. So just remember, we've already taken off the medical aid expenses right at the start. If they give you a medical aid expense, you just deduct it immediately. And like I said, we'll have a look at one next where we don't give you the expense, but we'd rather just say they're on a medical aid. So you deduct that straight away because it's non-taxable. And then here we would just subtract the rebates that qualify for this person because he was 65 years old. It was both the primary and the secondary. Just quickly, it's not often, but obviously just remember that if they asked you what was the monthly pay tax that was deducted off the paycheck, you would just take this amount that you've just found and you would divide that by 12 to get how much comes off his paycheck every single month. And sometimes we can ask that, especially if we gave you maybe like his payslip as a financial document type question, and the pay tax was then something you had to calculate. Because it would be a monthly amount that comes off, just remember you divide this value that you just got by 12 and you can get how much he pays in tax per month. Not a hard question, but just something to remember just because it is something that comes off every single month off an employee's paycheck. And so we could ask you in the context of like a financial document type question. Alrighty. I feel like I've...
Ma'am, can you please show where would we get our marks in that question?
This last one, or do you want me to just do for all of them?
The last one only, please.
Okay, cool. So this last one, just because of the fact that you have already done some of the calculations in previous questions, this would be about a 4 marker. So you would get a mark for substituting into your correct formula, and a mark for working out, but essentially that can then just go 2 marks for your formula. So getting the correct sort of substitution, doing the correct substitution, geez Louise. Then you would get a mark for subtracting your rebates and understanding that obviously that would be both of your rebates, and then a final mark for your answer. The one we did last week was a lot more marks because we had to do all of this stuff within the question. So in this first question, this would be like a 5 marker because you're having to include your 13th check. So times by 13, getting your annual gross, getting your medical expenses, working out your pension, and then getting your final annual taxable income. So because we had scaffolded or broken up the question, it is slightly less for the actual calculate the income tax. But just remember, if we don't do it, it would be a lot more marks, but we're just having to then include all those prior calculations. Okay. Right, I feel like this is going to be very small, so I'm going to just for you to screenshot. Because, yeah. Right, let's do that. I don't know if that was any better, but I made an attempt. It might have been good, it might have been bad. Right, there you go. So if you want to screenshot all of that, there it is for you. And then we'll have a look at a second type of income tax question whereby I don't tell you what the medical aid monthly fee is or annual fee is, but I do say that the person is part of a medical aid. And then what we have to do is take that into account with the medical aid tax credits that SARS provides. All right. So this next one, let's just make this a touch bigger again, is exactly that. So Aisha is 43 years old and earns a monthly salary of 38,000 Rand. She is married with 2 children. Her husband and children are all on her medical aid. So just quickly what that means in terms of like her medical aid dependence and her medical aid structure. She would be the main member. Oh, golly, let's try that again. She would be the main member, which means that when we get to the medical aid tables, we need to bear that in mind. So she's the main member. I'm just going to say main member like that. Her husband would be her first dependent. And then her 2 children, yes, 2 children are additional dependents, which means in total there are 4 people on her medical aid, and we will need to take that into account when we now deal with the medical aid tax credits in a second. She contributes 7% of her monthly salary towards a pension fund. Cool, nothing wrong there. And we've got 2 questions. So calculate her annual taxable income and then calculate her annual income tax payable using the tables below. So if we go to our first question, remember annual taxable income would be her gross annual income minus, in this case, the pension. We don't know the medical aid amount. So unlike in the first question, we can't deduct the medical aid because we don't know what she's paying per month. But when we do the tax calculations, that will come into accounting or subtracting for the medical aid credits. Okay, so if we have a look at the first question, annual taxable income, we first need her gross annual income. Now here, there's no mention of a 13th check, so we're just going to take that monthly income and times it by 12. So 38,000 times 12. Again, if your English today, if there was a mention of a 13th check, you just times it by 13. And that gives us 456,000 Rand. We then need to determine her pension. Now, her pension is 7% of this amount. And so we just work out 7%, which is 31,920 Rand. Sorry, that's a weird looking 3, but anywho. And so what that means is for us to get the annual taxable income, we now find the difference. So we will say the 456,000 minus the pension of 31,920. Just quickly, there are some other things that can be deducted before we start calculating tax. It will tell you in the question if it's anything weird, but things like charity contributions. So if, let's say, for example, she donated money to like the SPCA or something, that would also be something that we can take off before tax, because any charity donations are not taxable. The only reason I'm saying this is because in one of the past papers I looked at, I can't remember if it might have been last year or like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a mention of the person for the income tax made a contribution towards a charity. But it did say in the question which was non-taxable, and then you just remember to deduct it before you calculate tax. But that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, so now we know that the annual taxable income is 424,080 Rand. Nice and easy. Okay, nothing we need to stress about there. This would be probably probably 4 marker, not quite 5 marks as the last one, but a decent chunk of marks that you can get just by remembering to deduct your pension and any other non-taxable amounts. Right, question B then gets into the actual tax question. Again, calculate your annual income tax payable using the tables below. So we've got the taxable income. We now need to decide on the tax bracket. Once we have the tax bracket, we can deduct our rebates. And because she's 43, unfortunately, she only qualifies for the primary rebate because she's under 65. And once we've deducted the rebate, we can deal with the medical aid credits. So what I'd like you to do, and if you're feeling super confident, you can go all the way to the end. But what I'd like you guys to do for me, again, I'll give you I don't think we need 5 minutes, but I'll give you 3-4 minutes, is I'd like you to do up to deducting your rebate. If you feel super confident with the medical aid credits, by all means go all the way. But I would like you to work out the tax payable once you've deducted your rebate. We will deal together with what we do with the medical aid credits. But again, if you're feeling comfortable, go for it. The only thing I am going to say, if you're going to try it by yourself, this is a per month amount. And these income tax tables are annual. We spoke about this last week as well. Medical aid, for whatever reason, they've made life tricky. Medical aid is given as a per month, whereas tax is calculated annually. Right, so you're deducting up to the rebates, please. We will do the medical aid credits together, but obviously if you're feeling super comfortable, go for it. Alrighty, if you're not done, don't stress. You can just catch up with me. So we know the taxable income. We now need the bracket. Does everyone agree with me that we would be working with tax bracket 3 over here? That's the bracket that they fall into. Don't know why
Yes,
it's a
ma'am.
trapezium, but great. I don't know why I got a trapezium out of all of that, but there we are. So tax bracket 3, we just substitute in. So the 77,362 plus 31%. And all we do here, don't overthink it, take your taxable income, 424 and 80, and subtract the amount given to you in the table, the 370,500. That's it. Obviously, if you want to deduct the rebate at the same time, so do it in the same calculation, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people like to do it like that. Some people don't. It's completely up to you. You do you. I'm going to keep it separate for now. And so if we just work out our tax based on our bracket, we end up with an amount that is 93,971 Rand 80 cents. Obviously, if you don't agree with any of my values, just shout. It's always possible that I've done something silly. Then we deduct our rebate. And like I say, it's only the primary because she's 43 years old, 17,235. Hopefully what you also notice is that this rebate is different from the one we used in the previous question. They change every year. Tax tables change every year with inflation and so on. So this changes every year as well, which is also why we would never expect you to learn it off by heart. 76,736 Rand 80 cents. So that's where we're at before we even consider the medical aid. Now, this is where the medical aid comes in, and this is sometimes where we make a mistake because we forget about the fact that these medical aid credits that they give us, like I said earlier, are per month. All right, so we're in 2024. Sorry, I should have actually gotten rid of that. The amounts were the same, so it actually didn't matter which one you use, but we're in 2024. And if you read the description, so this first amount of 364 Rand is for the taxpayer or for a dependent who is a member of a medical aid scheme, where the taxpayer himself or herself is not a member of a medical aid scheme. Basically, what that means is for the first person. So this is for Aisha. The second amount, and we just need to be careful, we need to read carefully, it says for the taxpayer and one dependent. So this would be for herself as well as her husband. So this amount of 728 we will use to include her and her husband. She then also has 2 children on this medical aid. So right here at the bottom, it says for each additional dependent. So we've got the 728 Rand for both of them. And then we've got 246 Rand for the first kid and another 246 Rand for the second kid. That in total is how much they will spend on medical, or how much medical aid credit they will get per month. So if we add all of that together, we get that per month they get a credit of 1,220 Rand. But remember, this is a monthly amount. Income tax is annual. So the annual credits that they receive will be this amount times 12. Because that's all just in 1 month. We obviously want annual. So 14,640 Rand. And this we can now go and deduct from our income tax in order to get the amount of income tax that they need to pay. So 76,736 Rand 80 cents minus the 14,640. That gives us a final income tax that she owes of 62,096 Rand 80 cents. All right, so again, the medical aid credits is given per month. You have to remember to times by 12. Okay, it seems like such a silly thing, but this is, I think, why the medical aid credits we sometimes mess up, because we forget to multiply it by 12. We have to have it as an annual amount. So you take the values that apply to your scenario, you add them together, and you times them by 12. Please just read these tax tables carefully. They often give you for just the taxpayer, and then they say the next amount is for the taxpayer and the first dependent. If you say 364 times 2, you get 728. So that's why that amount exists, but just read it carefully because we don't want to add more credits or more values than we need to. And because it said for the first dependent and the taxpayer, we just use that 728 rand. All right, but again, not hard in any shape, sense, or form. It's just remembering all of these little steps that we have to take in order to actually work out our income tax. So here, in case you wanted the mark breakdown, there would be a mark for obviously the correct tax bracket. Generally, we do give an additional mark for some sort of working out or the answer of your tax, a mark for deducting your rebate. Obviously, you would have to do all this medical aid stuff. So a mark for adding them together, timesing it by 12, deducting that amount, and then your income tax. So this is a good 7-mark question. We could have even been more generous. And if we wanted to make it 8 marks, give you a mark for the monthly amount of your medical aids. But this is definitely, I would say, anywhere between a 6 and 8 mark question, depending how many marks we have to allocate. And it's all just because, again, it's all those little steps that we have to remember to do before we can actually get to the final answer. All right, so again, not tricky. And if we follow our flow diagram, we should be A-okay. But yes, this is how you would deal with the medical aid credits. Like I say, I have not seen one asked. I mean, I look back about 3 years. There was nothing with medical aids. And I'm not saying it can't come up. The only time it did come up was when they said this person was not a member of a medical aid. But I've yet to see it come up where you actually need to deal with and include medical aid. I'm not saying it will never come up. I'm just saying that from the pattern I've seen, it is yet to come up. All right, I'm just going to wait here for you guys to take a screenshot and then take a little stretch break because we're going to get into data. Obviously, as we spoke about last week, Saturday, finance is the bulk of paper 1. It accounts about 60-ish% of your paper 1. And data handling about 35% of paper 1. So still a decent chunk. And honestly, the data handling questions aren't tricky. It's just reading all the information that has been given to you. Right, but I'm waiting for screenshots. Like I say, take a little stretch, and then we will carry on in a minute and get into our data handling. And obviously, if you've got questions, just ask. All right. All right, so let's get into data. So guys, data really not, like I say, not too tricky. But as you go through the past papers, what you're going to see is that it's often just rather big numbers that you need to work with, which sometimes makes it hard to deal with the data handling questions. All right, so I've kind of put it easy. So remember we spoke about how the paper is structured. Question 1, I'll just jump back there if you want to see what I'm talking about. So question 1 is about 30 marks. And it's all level 1 questions from both data and finance. So it won't be the super, super tricky questions. And basically what you should be aiming for is full marks in question 1, because those are the level 1 easy questions, the straightforward questions. And so you should be aiming for full marks there. And so essentially you should be guaranteeing yourself 20% already for your paper. And then we move on to the rest. So question 2 is finance, but question 3 is data handling. And then question 4, 5 is an integration. Generally, obviously, it gets harder and harder as you go along. So I've kind of gone question 1, question 3, question 4, 5, so that we can see how it scales up. But really, like I say, question 1 is not supposed to be super tricky. And if you do find it tricky, it just might be the language around the question or the values used in the question. So just read carefully, use that reading time at the beginning of your paper productively. All right, so again, All of these notes are on the Google Classroom for you. There's obviously other questions in the past paper notes that I put up there. I've just selected the ones that I am choosing to do with you. And obviously then the links to the memos are all there for you as well. And if you do have questions about anything, you're welcome to just ask on the Classroom. And remember, as I go through stuff, just ask if you're not too sure. All right, so we've got Table 3 below shows the provincial results in mathematical literacy in the NSC or National Senior Certificate examinations in 2021. A candidate must achieve 30% or above to pass, right? And they've put that again down at the bottom of this table. That's 30 or more is a pass, below 30 is a failure. So the first question asks, excuse me, determine the total number of candidates who wrote mathematical literacy in 2021 in the Republic of South Africa. So essentially what it's saying to us is we want to figure out this national amount that has been left off at the bottom here. Okay, that would then be the sum of all of my provinces added together. So unfortunately, I know it seems like a very tedious thing, and like we will just give you full marks if you don't write it down, but you should be showing everything that you're doing. So unfortunately, you should be showing that you're adding all of these numbers together. I don't know if my brain has the capacity for this today, but we're doing it. So you would actually get a mark for this method. There is a mark allocated in the memo for you showing that you understood that you need to add all of these numbers together. Let's hope I don't leave anything out. Oops. That's a 2. Right, so there's actually a mark allocated, like I said, for you showing that you understand that you need to add everything together. And what you get is that the total number of students who wrote the Mathematical Literacy National Senior Certificate exam was 441,067 students. That was the number of candidates we had writing in 2021. Okay, 2 marks, easy. Got it. Determine the number of provinces that performed poorer than the national score in 2021 in terms of an achievement of 30% and above. Okay, so we need to go back to what this question is asking us to use as our like frame of reference or our reference point. So it's asking me to compare it to the national score. Now the national score of the percentage achieved at 30% or above, so that's in our table, was 74.5. So what is this actually asking me to do is everyone or which provinces got below 74.5. So below 74.5 was the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Limpopo, Mpumalanga, as well as the Northern Cape. Now, the question said, determine the number of provinces. It did not ask which provinces. It did not ask what were their percentages. It just said, determine the number of. So all you need to do here is say 5. 5 provinces. That's it. Obviously, if you wanted to write down their percentages, go for it. But the question said, how many, or determine the number of. And the reason I'm just pointing this out is because in Maths Lit, it's very important that you are actually answering the question. Sometimes we think we need to give more information than is necessary, and particularly in question 1, don't overthink it. If it's 5, it's 5. That's it. The question said, determine the number of, there's the number of, it's 5 provinces. Right, 4.3 says, calculate the number of candidates who pass mathematical literacy in the Eastern Cape in 2021. Okay, so Eastern Cape, 2021, the number of students who achieved above 30, the percentage of students who achieved above 30% was the 72.23, right at the top there. And the total number that wrote was 46,960. So that's how many of them wrote. This is the percentage of those who wrote that passed. And the question said, calculate the number of candidates. I'm actually just going to, no, I'm not apparently. The number of candidates who passed. Now, again, not a tricky question, but read it carefully. We want to figure out of these 46,960, only 72.3% achieved above 30%. So we need to work out 72.3% of our 46,960. So we would go and do that exact calculation. So 72.3%, you can obviously just write percentage, times the 46,960. And that will give us the number of students who passed MathsLit, which is 33,952 of those 46,960. Obviously, I could go a step further and say how many failed, and then you would just subtract it from your original amount or whatever you want to do, I suppose. But again, read it carefully, and understanding how percentage works is very important. So because we wanted the percentage of a total, you quite literally just work out the percentage of the total given to you for the Eastern Cape. So 1.4.4, determine the probability, and this is a probability question, but this is quite literally the probability that you get in your papers, nothing more complicated than that. So we are just going to chat about it. Determine the probability of randomly selecting the candidate that failed mathematical literacy in 2021 from those who wrote the subject in the Northern Cape. Right, couple things. Let's see if we remember, what are the different formats we can write our probability answer in? So we can write probability in different ways. Does anyone remember?
One of them is a fraction, and there's a
Good.
percentage.
Good.
And I think decimal.
Good. All right, so a fraction, a percentage, a decimal. We don't care which one you give us unless the question specifically said, determine the probability as a decimal or rounding off to 2 decimal places or something like that. If we don't tell you, we don't care. However, this table gives you percentages. So there's no need to try and convert it to a fraction or to a decimal. Just work in the percentage. That's what you've been given. So we are looking at Northern Cape. And the Northern Cape had 71.3% of its candidates pass. The question is asking me, determine the probability of randomly selecting a candidate that failed. So we know that 71.3% passed. How would we work out how many failed? What could we do?
Ma'am, would you find out how many students passed, like the number, and then use the number of students that wrote and minus that to get the number of students that failed?
Okay, so you could do that, absolutely. But remember, it says determine the probability. So I'm not asking you for the number of students that failed. I'm asking you for a probability, so a percentage. So you could do all of that, absolutely. You would just be adding more work to your load. What we could just do here is take the 100% that we know that wrote, subtract the 71.3% that we know that passed, and whatever that difference is, that's the percentage who failed. So it's pretty much what you said. It's just that we don't actually need to work out the number of. We can just subtract the percentages. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. But just so that we're all on the same page, that method that you just described is exactly how you would need to do it if I said determine the number of students that failed. All right. So again, just read your questions carefully so that you are answering the question. Now, you could have done it the way you said, absolutely, but just remember it's a probability. So then whatever you got as your number of students that failed, I'm just going to say X, you would then still have to divide that by your total number, which was the 9,813. In order to get a probability. So you definitely could do it like that. You've just added a bit more work for yourself, but there's nothing wrong with that method at all. All right. I feel like this is going to be very small. Here we go. So we can screenshot that. I'll try to be better with screenshots on the next one so it's not so teeny tiny. And then let's have a look at sort of level up. I think it's a question 3. What we need to get used to, guys, is working with tables like we have here. And you'll see now in this next question, again, working with tables of values. Atia, sorry.
Ma'am, for the question 4, right? You said 100 minus 71.3%.
Mm-hmm.
Do you just put that in the calculator and you get 28.7%?
Yes, unless I can't type into a calculator. Did you not get that?
No.
28.7, that's what I got. So remember, it's 100% minus 71.3%. So you don't actually need to put the percentage sign on your calculator. You can just say 100 minus 71.3.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Does that make more sense? Sorry, I shouldn't have put one percentage sign and not the other.
No, ma'am, it's fine. I got it now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Sorry, that was my fault. Alrighty, so let's have a look at this one. Like I say, a little trickier, but let's see what it has to say to us. So it says, the state of the country's economy is monitored on a monthly basis by conducting various surveys. These results are used to establish how businesses are doing in the current state of the economy. So table 6 on the annexure, which I've just put here, gives a summary of retail trade sales for various retailers, sure, who would have thought that was a hard word to say, for the period of April 2022 to September 2022. And there we've got it all. Now, a couple things that we need to just take note of for our table so that when we start writing down our answers, we are sort of bearing in mind what's happening. First things first is the values that we've been given here is in millions of rands. So that is our unit that we're working in. And so, for example, let's say this value here would be 9,114 million rand. Right, so we've got different types of retailers, and then we've got the 6-month period over which their sales were recorded or kept track of. So you've got general dealers, food, beverages, pharmaceuticals, textiles, households, hardware, and then all others. Right, a couple of things to start like sort of looking for in your tables when you are given them. First things first is there missing value? So we can definitely see that there's a missing value of A over here. And then for August and for June, for all of them, we don't have any values here, which is fine. We're either going to be asked to calculate them, or they might just be useful for us later on or in no way useful to us. But just sort of think about the fact that you are missing some values, and that might be important for us to take note of a bit later. So the first question says, calculate the total sales for hardware, paint, and glass in August 2022. All right, so that's one of those first values that I said we're missing. There it is. We know that for the whole of August, all of the retailers had sales amounting to 101,447 million rand. Now, if we know what the total is, so if I added up all of these amounts and I know what the total is, how could I go and work out what that missing amount is?
Ma'am, you would take the total amount and minus the amounts that you have to get the answer that's missing.
Perfect, exactly. So we would take the 101,447 and we would subtract all of those other amounts. So 48,319, 8,542. And I'm not going to keep saying the numbers because I feel like that would just be incredibly painful for you. Sure. Okay, so you subtract all of those. If you wanted to add them all together first and then subtract, if you want to just put minus signs in all of them and leave out the brackets, whatever you want, as long as you understand that you need to take away everything you know in order to get what was missing. And that gives you 8,976, and again, remember, million rands. I'm just going to put an R there. Now, if you feel super comfortable to be able to convert that to millions of rands, obviously go for it. Because we know that millions, whoopsie, has 6 zeros, you would just put 6 zeros at the end of it. Personally, I wouldn't do that just in case I made a silly mistake. I would quite literally write down the answer that I got and then just add the million. That's good enough. Alrighty. So nice and easy. Yeah, I've just kept putting the table here for us because I didn't want to scroll up and down. So now we know that this amount that was missing in our table is the 8,976. And as you start to find things, put it into your table, put it onto your diagram or whatever the case is, because it's probably going to help later on. So 3.1.2 said, which type of retailer showed the greatest increase in sales between April and May? So we're only looking at the first 2 months of sales, April and May, and we want the greatest increase in sales. Have a look and tell me which one you think.
Ma'am, would it be May?
So we're looking for which type of retailer. So of these retailers that we've been given over here, which had the greatest increase? So for example, if we had a look at pharmaceuticals, in April, they were 8,073 million, but then they decreased to 7,517 million. Definitely not them. Textiles also saw a decrease, so definitely not them. So kind of go through and see from April to May, which had the biggest increase.
Would it be general dealers?
Nice, excellent. Okay, so our general dealers, it's about, I can tell you exactly what it is if you really feel that way, but it's about 5,000 Rand, 42,000 to 47,000. All of the others are very small increases or a decrease. So this again is a household furniture, a slight increase. Hardware paint, only about 1,000-ish Rand increase. This was a decrease. This was the only one that had any sort of significant increase in sales. So yes, exactly. It would be our general dealers. That's all the greatest increase. So again, just read your questions carefully. And even if you need to, like I've done, highlight on your table what you need to focus on, because there's a lot of numbers here, which can get a little bit confusing to try and decipher everything that it means. So really important, the table's there for you. Your addendum is yours. Scribble on it, highlight on it, scratch out on it, fill in on it, do whatever you need to do to help yourself. Alrighty, so this is now where the questions start ramping up. They've eased us in, but now they're going to start ramping up the level of question. So it says calculate, and this is important, rounded to the nearest billion, the value of A. So remember, we identified A as one of our missing values in our table. If the mean sales for the month of June was 14,275.86 million Rand. Right, so a couple things here. Firstly, this instruction of rounded to the nearest billion, this will be a mark. So on or in your answer, if you have not rounded off, you will lose one of those 5 marks because it gave a very specific instruction about what it wanted. And so there is a mark allocated for your rounding. Right, next thing. What is the mean? When we say mean in data handling, what is that?
It's the, like you add all the numbers and you divide it by how many numbers there are.
Excellent. Okay, that was actually going to be my next question. So it's another word for it is average. And exactly the way we calculate it is sum of all our values divided by the total number of values. And that's going to be useful for us in a second. Terrible handwriting, but there we go. So that's our mean. Now we have been given the mean. So if this was a sort of an equation that we set up, we now know exactly what that mean is. Obviously I have an F space with the decimal, but we get it. So what we can start to do is we can start to fill in information into our mean or average formula, and we can start to figure out, okay, cool, what do I need to do in order to get that A value? Now remember, A is one of those values that I would have to add together to get my average. So the values I'm adding together are all the values in June, all of the values in June. And then what I'm doing is I'm dividing it by the 7 retailers that I have. If you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 retailers, that's exactly what my formula tells us to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill in what we know, and we're going to see how we can substitute, how we can solve for A. So we know that the mean is 14,275,86 million. And in our numerator, we need to sum all of these values. So that would be 47,609 plus 88,298, etc., etc. I'm going to put the A at the end. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but I'm just going to put it at the end for now. The only reason I'm choosing to put it at the end is because all of these 6 numbers that I've written before, I can add those together to get an amount. And I know that I'm dividing it by the 7 retailers. So if I do go and add the 47,609, 8,298, blah, 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 if I add all of those values together, let's just write this down, I get a total of 92,747 plus A over 7. And now what we need to do is we need to almost go back to our grade 8 and grade 9 equation solving. And we now need to go and solve our equation to get A alone. Okay, so this is probably the most mathy, or one of the more mathy type of questions that we need to deal with in MathsLit. But can you tell me how I could go and solve our equation here? What would I need to do first?
Ma'am, would you divide both sides by 7?
Okay, do you agree with me? This is already being divided by 7.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the opposite of dividing?
Times.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to times both sides by 7. Because what that's going to do is it's going to get rid of my denominator on the right-hand side. Excellent. All right, so if we times that 14 blah, blah, blah by 7, we get 99,931,02. And then we have that equal to 92,747 plus A. And how am I now going to get that A alone?
I want to say you minus.
Excellent. Well done. So we're going to minus the 92,474 on both sides, because numbers aren't numbering today. Sorry. Help if I wrote the right thing down. So yes, we do minus, because what that's going to do is on the right-hand side, it gets rid of that and leaves me with just A. But if we go back to our solving equations, what you do on one side of your equation, you must do on the other side. So in order for us to get A, we subtract these 2 values. And we get that value of A is equal to, let's maybe subtract it properly. $7,183,02. I'll deal with the rounding now in a second, but that's what we do when we subtract them. All right, so remember, this is millions. So if I wrote this as a million, it would be 7,183,020,000. And the question said rounded to the nearest billion. So this is billions. This is 7,183,020,000. This 1 has no effect on my 7. So this would just be 7 billion rand as my final rounded off answer. Terrible arrow, but anyway. So when you are rounding off, always just remember to look at the number directly to the right and see what effect it has on your first number or second decimal place, third decimal place, whatever it is you're rounding off to. If it's 5 or above, round up. If it's 4 or below, round down. And like I said, when you're solving an equation, just remember those inverse or opposite operations, and what you do on one side of your equation, you must do on the other side. Asya?
Ma'am, what if A's answer was 7183.05? Would the number stay the same, or would it go higher?
So because it says to the nearest billion, again, what we need to remember is that this answer that we got here is in millions of rand. So this is 7,183,02 million. So I would now have to convert this to those millions. So it'd be 7,183,050,000. But this would have no effect on my rounding off because the 1 million doesn't affect the 7 billion.
Okay.
Okay. So the only time it would round it up to 8 billion is if this had been like 7683. Then that 6 would round that 7 up to an 8.
Okay. So the 3 wouldn't change.
No. The 3 would only change if it was, let's say, 7183,50. Then that 5 would round the 3 up. Okay, so it needs to be directly next to it.
Okay.
All right, nice. Cool. All right, so 3.1.4 says calculate the median score of sales for food, beverages, and tobacco in specialized stores. Right, we'll get to that retailer type in a second. First question to you is, what is the median?
Median is the middle number.
Good. Right, so this is the middle number, but very importantly, it is of an ordered data set. What how to spell ordered for a second. And what I mean by that is, so they've asked us for food, beverages, and tobacco. That is this retailer over here in blue. I know there's a lot of colors going on my table here. Oh, right. Okay. That one in blue. And so what we need to do is we actually need to take all of these values and we need to put them in ascending order. So we need to go from smallest to biggest so that we can find the median. If you don't put it in order, whatever you find is incorrect. And that's why it needs to be in order. So we go from the smallest to the biggest. The smallest value that I have here is the 8298. And I'm just going to cross them off as I go along. So 8298. Then 8462. Then 8542. Sorry if you can hear someone driving crazy outside. 8607. 8978. And then that 9050. I should have 6 numbers. Let's just count. I do have 6, so that's perfect. So I have to put it in order. If you don't put it in order, whatever you're finding is not the median. It is the middle number of an ordered data set. Okay, now when it comes to median, 2 things can happen. If you have an even numbered data set, so like we have here, we've got 6 data points. What's going to happen is that your median is going to fall directly in the middle of 2 values. Because do you agree with me that the median will fall directly between the 8542 and the 8607, because that splits my data set equally in half. Now, if this happens, what we do to find our median is we need to figure out what number is directly in between those 2 values. So all we do is we add them together and we divide it by 2. That finds the middlemost point. And when you do that and divide it by 2, you get 8574,5 million. Again, I wouldn't even bother to try and write in the zeros, just write million. Yeah, so that's what happens in an even numbered data set. However, sometimes we have an odd number data set. So let's say we had 7 values. I'm just going to draw circles or squiggles, whatever these things are. 5, 6, 7. Okay. What ends up happening is that my median in an odd number data set is an actual data point. So if it is even, you will have to add the two numbers together and divide it by 2 to get the middle value in between them. But if it's an odd number data set, your median will be an actual number in your data set. And that's just sort of how it works out with even and odd numbers. It's still dividing it into 2 because there's 3 data points on either side, and this one data point indicates the middle. Whereas here for our even number data set, the one with the 6 values, it still splits it 3 on either side. It just so happens that we need to go and work out what the value is smack bang in the middle. Right, so median, please remember to order your data set. This is why this question was for so many marks. It's not a hard question, but it's for 4 marks because you have to put it in order. You have to make sure you've written your values down correctly, and then you have to do the addition and divide by 2. Right, any questions so far? I think what I'm going to do though is just okay, you've got the question, so I'm just going to do that so you can take a screenshot of the answers that we've got so far, and then we'll look at 315. Alrighty. Oops. Okay, that's a bit aggressive. Okay, so if we have a look here, 315, write down the sales for general dealers of April to the sales for pharmaceuticals and medical goods of August as a unit ratio rounded off to 2 decimal places. Now, again, if we have no idea what any of this means, this is a very hard question to deal with. And honestly, unit ratio is not something that we work with a whole lot, but we will discuss what it means so that we do know what we're doing. Right, so first things first is the sales for general dealers of April. So general dealers April, this amount over here, to the sales for pharmaceuticals and medical goods of August. So there's August pharmaceuticals. So those are the 2 values that we're working with. Now, when we are told to work with a unit ratio, what that means, excuse me, what that means is we want a ratio that says 1 is to some value. So one of my numbers in my ratio must be 1. So let's write down what we have. And remember, guys, ratios, the order is important. So because general dealers was mentioned first, that has to be the first number I write down, 42,716. And the one that was mentioned second is written down second, 7987. Now, neither of those is a value of 1. Remember, we want it as a unit ratio. Now, how you choose to do this is really up to you. I'll show you the 2 different answers you could get, but it's up to you. Okay, so first option is you want to make this first number 1. The only way for me to make 42,716 1 is to divide it by itself, because 42,716 divided by 42,716 gives me 1. But similar to an equation, in a ratio, if you're going to do that to one of your values, you need to do it to your other value as well. And so what that means is I end up with a ratio of 1 is to 0,19. Not the nicest ratio in the world, but that's what they wanted. They wanted a unit ratio. Who are we to argue? So that's one way to do it. The other way that you could choose to do this is you could say, okay, cool, I have my numbers. And rather than make my first value, 1, I'm going to make my second value 1. So all that means is that I want to make this 1. So I'm going to divide by 7987. And if I'm going to do that on the right, I must do that on the left. And so here I get a ratio of 5,35 to 1. Again, it's a unit ratio. One of my numbers is 1. That's what they wanted. Who knows why, but that's what they wanted. That's what they got. So all you need to remember is that if it's a unit ratio, unit means 1. So one of my numbers must be 1. And then you just make sure that you divide appropriately. If it had just asked for a simplified ratio, your calculator will automatically do that for you. So we've got a 42716 to 7987. So if all it had asked for is write down the ratio or simplified ratio, all you do to get the simplified ratio is you take those two numbers and you divide them on your calculator. So I'll show you what I mean now. So quite literally like that on your calculator. Obviously, it's going to be difficult. You just divide them. That's it. You put it in the correct order, you push equals, and your calculator will automatically give you a simplified answer, which it's not doing. So it can't be written as a fraction, but that's it. But let's say, for example, I don't know, you had a ratio of like 6,500 to 3,200, I don't know, whatever. Anytime you type it into your calculator automatically gives you a simplified answer. That fraction that you get, that's your ratio that you write down. All right, so just bear that in mind. Your calculator is super useful when it comes to ratios and needing to simplify. There's no need for you to try and do it in your head or try and work it out. Just use your calculator. Any questions about this one?
Ma'am, you would still get your marks for both of the answers, the different answers.
Yes. So both of these answers would be accepted because it didn't say which one needed to be the unit. So it didn't say that it must be general dealers represented by 1. So both of these will give you full marks.
Okay.
All right, 3.1.6 says determine the percentage change of the total retail trade sales between April and September. You may use the formula percentage change equals difference in monthly sales divided by original monthly sales times 100. So this is a formula that I encourage you to remember. We are quite nice in MathsLit in that we do often give you formulas, but not necessarily always. And this can be useful in a huge number or a variety of different scenarios. So anytime you want a percentage change, whether it's increase, decrease, so even if it said work out the percentage decrease, you use this formula. It's the new value minus the old value divided by the old value times 100. So they've obviously taken this formula and made it more specific for in terms of sales, but this can work with anything. It could be something like, what is the percentage change in area if you had like the area of a room that you made bigger or that you made smaller. As long as you're working out a percentage change, you use this formula. So with that being said, when it says new, it's the latest. So we would take the September sales. Now we want retail trade. Where's retail trade? Oh, total. Sorry, that would help, hey? I read the question carefully. So total, right at the bottom here, September, yep, 101,113. So that's the new. Minus the old, so the earlier value, 98,502. Divided by the original monthly sales, so divided by the old value, 98,502. And you times by 100. Now, again, this is a 4-mark question. 2 of these marks are for you being able to read these values correctly. So a mark for reading the correct September value, a mark for reading the correct April value, a mark for actually substituting into your formula. And quite literally, that first step is 75% of my question. And I'll just type that into my calculator, and I get that it was an increase of 6,265%. Which is my final mark. But again, what you need to remember in MathsLit, and particularly in data handling, is you reading off the correct values gives you marks. So even in that median question we had earlier, you're going to get a mark for reading your values correctly from your table. Reading values is incredibly important and a very important skill to have in MathsLit because it then determines the outcome of obviously a lot of your calculations. So like I say here, you got 50% of your marks by reading 2 values from a table. You got 75% of your marks, or 3 marks, by reading the values and substituting into the formula that was given to you. And then obviously 100% of your marks by typing it into your calculator. And so this is what I said to you last weekend. We're quite generous with our marks. So just because it says 4 marks, it doesn't mean that you need to be writing half a page worth of working out. This isn't maths, okay? Like, it's not like a trig situation where half the page is taken up. No. Remember, you get marks for reading values, marks for, like we saw earlier, just a rounding. That's 1 mark. And so don't panic when you see big mark questions. And again, I said this last week, it's nothing to be scared of. It just means that we are allocating marks for very specific things, reading values off a table, understanding that you needed to subtract or whatever the case is. So don't be scared by big mark questions. It's nothing scary. Just bear in mind that the mark allocation is often more generous than what you would think. So don't overthink your answering. Okay, I can't actually remember where we screenshotted up to, if I'm being completely honest. I think we did that. So I think we're here. Alrighty. Alright, I know it's 4 o'clock, but we have done a fair amount, which is awesome. Whoopsie daisy. And obviously finance is the more important section in paper 1. So I'm glad we got to do some more income tax, because that is the one we struggle with, and it is often the big mark question in paper 1. So yeah, thank you for asking me to do that. We got through some data handling. We understand mean, median, all of those things, how to work with it. This was a very nice question in terms of like more complex types questions, particularly with that mean question where we had to work out the value of A. And so finance and data handling, that is your paper 1. Obviously some probability questions, but guys, honestly, I'll come back to this after you haven't screenshotted. The probability question is a 2-mark question. And throughout a paper, you maybe get 2 probability, 3 probability questions. So it's maybe 4 to 6 marks in your entire paper that you're going to be asked probability. And it's a relatively basic, easy probability question. That's why it's asked in both papers, as I said last week. But if you don't get it, you don't get it.